The rain started the way it always did in Western Oregon. Soft at first, a whisper against the windows of the small rental house on Maple Street in Eugene. Sarah Bennett stood at the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in dishwater that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She wasn't washing dishes anymore. She was staring through the window at the backyard, where her 7-year-old son, Michael, sat motionless in his wheelchair under the covered porch, watching the rain, with an expression she could never quite read. Michael had been born with cerebral palsy. His legs didn't work the way other children's did, and his speech came slowly, each word a mountain he had to climb. But his mind was sharp, sharper than most people gave him credit for. Sarah knew this. She saw it in his eyes when he watched the world, taking in everything, processing it all behind a silence that most people mistook for absence. The house was quiet except for the drum of rain on the roof. Sarah's husband, Tom, had left for his construction job before dawn and wouldn't be home until after 6. The isolation of their days had become routine. Michael's physical therapy appointments, the special education meetings at school, the endless paperwork for insurance and medical equipment. It was a life measured in increments, small victories, constant adjustments, and the persistent ache of wondering what Michael's future would look like. Before I continue with Michael and Sarah's story, I'd love it if you could subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It helps us share more stories like this one. Now, let's get back to that rainy morning in Eugene. Sarah pulled her hands from the sink and dried them on a towel that hung from the oven handle. She walked to the back door and opened it, letting in the smell of wet earth and pine. "You okay out here, buddy?" she called. Michael turned his head slowly, his neck muscles working with the deliberate effort that marked all his movements. He nodded, then looked back at the rain. Sarah stepped outside, the cold air raising goosebumps on her arms. She crouched beside his wheelchair, her hand resting on the armrest. "What are you thinking about?" Michael's mouth worked for a moment before the word came. "Dog." Sarah's chest tightened. They'd had this conversation before. Michael had been asking for a dog for 2 years, ever since he'd seen a service dog demonstration at his school. But dogs were expensive, and their landlord had a strict no-pets policy. More than that, Sarah worried about the responsibility. She was already stretched thin, and Tom worked 60-hour weeks just to keep them afloat. "I know you want one," she said softly. "Maybe someday." Michael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. He was learning too young that someday often meant never. Sarah stayed beside him for another minute, then went back inside to finish the dishes. Through the window, she watched her son sit alone in the rain and felt the familiar weight of inadequacy pressing down on her shoulders. That afternoon, after she'd picked Michael up from school and settled him in front of the television with his adaptive controller for his video games, Sarah's phone rang. It was Rebecca, her older sister who lived in Portland. "I found something," Rebecca said without preamble. "A dog. Well, not exactly. A rescue organization that specializes in training service dogs for kids with disabilities. They have a program where they place dogs that didn't quite make it through the full certification. They're trained, just not to the level required for official service dog status. They're looking for families who need them." Sarah sat down at the kitchen table, her heart already starting to race with a hope she didn't want to feel. "Becca, we can't afford. It's donation-based. You pay what you can, and I already called the organization. I told them about Michael. They want to meet you. Our landlord. Service dogs and emotional support animals are protected under fair housing laws. I looked it up. They can't refuse." Sarah closed her eyes. Her sister had always been the one who pushed, who believed things could be better if you just fought hard enough. Sarah had learned to be more cautious, to protect herself and Michael from disappointments. "I don't know," Sarah said. "Just meet them. What's the harm in that?" Sarah looked through the doorway at Michael, who was focused on his game, his fingers moving with painstaking slowness over the controller. He'd been asking for a dog for 2 years. 2 years of saying, maybe, someday, we'll see. Okay, she said. I'll meet them. The organization was called Second Chance Companions, and their office was in a converted warehouse in northeast Portland, about 2 hours north of Eugene. Sarah made the drive on a Saturday morning, Tom staying home with Michael. She'd told her son where she was going, and the hope that had flooded his face had terrified her. What if this didn't work out? What if the dog was wrong for them, or too expensive, or the landlord found a way around the law? The warehouse smelled like dogs and cleaning solution. A woman named Patricia greeted her at the door, mid-50s, with grey hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of smile that seemed genuine rather than professional. "You must be Sarah," Patricia said, shaking her hand. "Rebecca told me about Michael. Come on back." They walked through a large open space where several dogs were being put through training exercises by volunteers. Sarah saw German Shepherds, Golden Retrievers, a Labrador, all the breeds she associated with service dogs. Patricia led her to a smaller room in the back, where a single dog waited in a kennel. The moment Sarah saw her, something shifted in her chest. The dog was a border collie, black and white, with one blue eye and one brown. She sat perfectly still, watching Sarah with an intensity that was almost unnerving. "This is Keeper," Patricia said, opening the kennel. The dog stepped out calmly without rushing and sat immediately at Patricia's feet. "She's 3 years old. We got her as a puppy with the intention of training her as a full-service dog, but she washed out of the program." "Why?" Sarah asked. "She's too focused." "I know that sounds strange, but for a service dog, you need an animal that can multitask, respond to commands, monitor their handler, stay aware of their surroundings. Keeper fixates. When she bonds with someone, she doesn't look away. For some applications, that would be perfect. For others, it's a liability." Patricia gestured for Sarah to sit in one of the chairs against the wall. Keeper's eyes tracked the movement, but she didn't move from her position. She's been through basic obedience, house training, public access training. She knows about 50 commands. She's gentle, patient, and she's got a gift for reading emotional states. We've been looking for the right placement for her for 6 months. "Why hasn't anyone taken her?" Patricia smiled sadly. "People want the Golden Retriever, the lab. Border collies are intense. They need a job, a purpose. Keeper needs someone to care for. We've been waiting for the right match." Sarah looked at the dog, who was now looking directly back at her. Those mismatched eyes seemed to see straight through her, reading all the doubt and fear and desperate hope she'd carried into this building. "Can I meet her? I mean, really meet her?" Patricia handed Sarah the leash. "Take her outside. There's a small yard out back. Spend some time with her." The yard was fenced and equipped with agility equipment that the dogs used for training. Sarah let Keeper off the leash, expecting her to run, to explore. Instead, the dog sat down directly in front of her and waited. "You're supposed to play," Sarah said, feeling foolish for talking to a dog. Keeper tilted her head, then stood and walked a slow circle around Sarah before sitting again, closer this time. Sarah crouched down, bringing herself to the dog's level. Keeper leaned forward and pressed her forehead against Sarah's knee, a gesture so gentle and deliberate that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm enough for you, or for him, or for any of this." Keeper lifted her head and looked at Sarah with those strange, beautiful eyes. Then she licked Sarah's hand once, softly, and rested her chin on Sarah's thigh. Sarah stayed there in the yard for 20 minutes, just sitting with the dog, feeling the weight and warmth of her presence. When she finally went back inside, Patricia was waiting with paperwork and a patient expression. "What do you think?" Patricia asked. Sarah took a breath. I think I need to bring my son to meet her. They came back the following Saturday, all three of them. Tom pushed Michael's wheelchair through the warehouse while Sarah walked ahead, her stomach a knot of anxiety. She'd tried to prepare Michael, tried to explain that this might not work out, but he'd been so excited all week that she'd finally stopped trying to manage his expectations. Patricia brought Keeper out on a leash. The dog's eyes immediately found Michael, and something in her posture changed, a subtle shift that Sarah couldn't quite name but felt deeply. "Hey there," Patricia said, kneeling beside the wheelchair. "You must be Michael. This is Keeper. Would you like to say hello?" Michael's hand trembled as he reached out. Keeper stepped forward slowly, allowing him to touch her head. His fingers tangled in her fur, and his whole face transformed. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Keeper stood completely still, her body pressed against the side of the wheelchair, her eyes fixed on Michael's face. She didn't look away. Not once. Patricia let the leash go slack. "Keeper, sit." The dog sat, still watching Michael. "Keeper, down." The dog lay down, her head resting on her paws, eyes never leaving the boy. "Michael," Patricia said gently, "can you try giving her a command? Just say paw, and see what she does." Michael's mouth worked, his tongue fighting to form the word. Paw. Keeper lifted her right paw and held it in the air. Michael laughed, a sound Sarah hadn't heard in weeks, and Keeper's tail began to wag, a slow, deliberate movement. Tom crouched beside Sarah, his hand finding hers. "Look at that," he murmured. They spent an hour in that room. Patricia showed them how Keeper could retrieve items, how she could brace against the wheelchair for stability if Michael wanted to practice standing transfers, how she responded to both verbal and physical cues. But what struck Sarah most was the way the dog never stopped watching Michael, the way she seemed to anticipate his needs before he expressed them. When it was time to go, Michael's face crumpled. No. "We have to go home, buddy," Tom said. "But we're going to talk about this, okay?" She... Michael struggled with the words, his frustration building. Keeper stood and placed her chin on the armrest of his wheelchair, looking up at him. Michael's breathing slowed. He touched her head again. "She... stays." Sarah looked at Patricia, then at Tom. Her husband's eyes were red. "Let me talk to our landlord," Sarah said. "Give us a week." The landlord was a man named Frank Morrison, who owned a dozen rental properties around Eugene and had a reputation for being inflexible. Sarah had been dreading this conversation for days, but on Monday morning, she called his office and made an appointment. She brought documentation, printouts of the Fair Housing Act provisions, letters from Michael's doctors explaining his condition, information about emotional support animals and their legal protections. She sat in Frank's cluttered office above a hardware store on Willamette Street and laid it all out on his desk. Frank was in his 60s, overweight, with a perpetual scowl that deepened as he looked through the papers. "You're telling me I have to let you have a dog?" "It's not a pet," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. "It's a support animal for my son's disability, under federal law." "I know the law." Frank tossed the papers back across the desk. "Doesn't mean I have to like it. Dogs tear up carpet, scratch floors, disturb neighbors. This dog is trained. She's housebroken, obedient. She won't cause damage." They all say that. Sarah felt her composure beginning to crack. "Mr. Morrison, my son has cerebral palsy. He's 7 years old and he can barely speak. This dog, she helps him. She calms him, helps him communicate, gives him something to focus on besides his limitations. I'm not asking you to do us a favor. I'm telling you what the law requires." Frank stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he sighed and pulled out a form from his desk drawer. "Fine, fill this out. But if that dog causes problems, Service animal or not, we're going to have a conversation. Sarah filled out the form with shaking hands, signed it, and left before Frank could change his mind. That evening, she called Patricia and told her they'd take Keeper. Patricia's voice warmed with genuine pleasure. "I'm so glad. I had a feeling about this one. When can you come pick her up?" "This weekend?" "Perfect. I'll have everything ready." On Saturday, they drove back to Portland with an empty dog crate in the back of their aging Honda CR-V. Michael had barely slept the night before, and he'd been humming tunelessly all morning, a habit he had when he was excited but couldn't find the words. Patricia met them with Keeper and a canvas bag filled with supplies: food, bowls, toys, a folder with training information, and Keeper's medical records. The dog's tail wagged when she saw Michael, and she pulled toward his wheelchair with surprising strength. "She remembers you," Patricia said, smiling. "I told you. Border Collies don't forget." They loaded Keeper into the crate, and Michael insisted that Sarah angle his wheelchair so he could see her through the back window. The whole drive home, the dog sat calmly in the crate, her eyes visible in the rearview mirror, watching Michael watch her. When they got home, Tom carried the crate inside, while Sarah pushed Michael's wheelchair up the ramp they'd installed last year. The moment they opened the crate in the living room, Keeper stepped out and went directly to Michael, pressing her body against the side of his chair. "Okay, buddy," Tom said. "She's home. She's really home." Michael's hand found the dog's head, and he closed his eyes. Sarah saw his lips moving, forming words that wouldn't come, but Keeper seemed to understand anyway. She rested her chin on his lap and stayed there, perfectly still, perfectly present. That night, after they'd set up Keeper's bed in Michael's room and gone through the evening routine, Sarah lay in bed next to Tom, staring at the ceiling. "Do you think this was the right choice?" she asked. Tom rolled toward her, his arm draping across her waist. "Did you see his face today? When have we ever seen him that happy?" "I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "What if something happens to the dog? What if she gets sick or runs away or—" "Then we'll deal with it. But right now, today, we gave our son something he's needed for a long time. That's enough." Sarah wanted to believe him. She closed her eyes and tried to quiet the anxious voice in her head that catalogued everything that could go wrong. Down the hall, in Michael's room, Keeper lay on her bed beside his wheelchair, her eyes open, watching the boy sleep. She didn't know about doubt or fear or the future. She only knew that she had found her purpose, the person she was meant to protect and serve, and she would never look away. The first weeks with Keeper were harder than Sarah had anticipated, though not in the ways she'd feared. The dog herself was perfect, calm, obedient, housebroken exactly as promised. She didn't bark unnecessarily, didn't chew furniture, didn't have accidents. But the intensity of her focus on Michael was sometimes unsettling. Keeper followed Michael everywhere. When he was at school, she waited by the front door, her body oriented toward the street, ears pricked for the sound of the special education bus. When he was home, she stayed within 3 feet of his wheelchair, moving only when he moved. At night, she slept beside his bed, and Sarah would sometimes wake at 2 or 3 in the morning and look in on them, finding the dog awake, watching Michael with those mismatched eyes. "It's not normal," Sarah said to Tom one evening after Michael was asleep. "The way she stares at him. It's like she's waiting for something." Tom was reading on the couch, his work boots still on because he'd been too tired to unlace them. He looked up, his expression patient. "Patricia said she's focused. That's what border collies do, but it's every minute. She barely eats unless Michael's nearby. Yesterday, I tried to take her for a walk while he was at therapy, and she just planted her feet and wouldn't move. Maybe she's still adjusting. It's been 3 weeks." Tom set down his book. "Is this about the dog or about something else?" Sarah sat down beside him, pulling her knees to her chest. I don't know. Maybe I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Everything with Michael has always been so hard, and this feels too easy, too good. Maybe that's exactly what it's supposed to be, Tom said, pulling her against his side. Maybe we earned something easy. Sarah wanted to believe him, but optimism had never been her strong suit. She'd learned early in Michael's life that hope was a luxury you couldn't afford when you were just trying to survive each day. But Michael was changing in ways she couldn't deny. His physical therapist, a woman named Andrea, who'd been working with him for 3 years, noticed it first. His muscle tone is better, Andrea said after a session in late October. They were in the therapy room at the clinic, where Michael was practicing standing transfers with the help of parallel bars. Keeper sat 10 feet away, exactly where Andrea had told her to stay, her eyes locked on Michael. He's more motivated. Usually, by this point in the session, he's exhausted and frustrated. Today, he wanted to keep going. Sarah watched her son, whose face was red with effort as he pulled himself upright, his legs shaking with the strain. Keeper's tail twitched, but she stayed in place. He's trying to impress the dog, Sarah said. Whatever works. Andrea moved to spot Michael as he attempted to shift his weight from one leg to the other. How's he doing at school? Better. His teacher says he's more engaged, asking to participate more often. He's even making friends. This last part was almost too precious to say aloud. Michael had always been isolated at school. The other kids didn't know how to interact with him, and his difficulty speaking made social connections nearly impossible. But something had shifted. Maybe it was confidence. Maybe it was just that Keeper gave him something to talk about, a bridge to other children who wanted to hear stories about his dog. After the session, Sarah loaded Michael into the car, and Keeper jumped in beside him, immediately pressing close. Michael's hand found her fur, and his breathing, which had been rapid from the exertion of therapy, began to slow. Good girl, he said, the words coming slightly easier than they had a month ago. Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror. You worked really hard today, buddy. I'm proud of you. Michael smiled, still petting Keeper. The dog's eyes were half closed now, her body relaxed but still oriented toward the boy. Sarah started the car and headed home, allowing herself for just a moment to feel something like peace. But peace never lasted long. The trouble started the first week of November. Sarah got a call from Michael's school, the principal, Mr. Vance, asking her to come in for a meeting. He wouldn't say what it was about over the phone, which immediately set off alarm bells. She drove to the school that afternoon, her mind racing through possibilities. Had Michael had a meltdown? Had he been hurt? She'd received these calls before, usually when there was a problem with his care plan or a conflict with another student. Mr. Vance's office was small and cluttered with educational posters and stacks of paperwork. He was a thin man in his 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the permanently tired expression of someone who'd been in education too long. Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Bennett, he said, gesturing to a chair. I wanted to talk to you about Michael's service dog. Sarah's stomach dropped. Is there a problem? Well, that's what we need to discuss. Several teachers have expressed concerns about having the dog in the classroom. They feel it's disruptive. Disruptive how? Keeper doesn't bark, doesn't move around. She lies beside Michael's desk. Some students are distracted by her. And there's the question of allergies. We have students with severe dog allergies who could have reactions. Sarah felt her face heating. Those students aren't in Michael's classroom. I checked. And Keeper is a service animal. She's legally allowed to be with Michael. Mr. Vance shifted in his chair. Actually, that's not quite accurate. Keeper isn't a certified service dog. She's an emotional support animal, which doesn't carry the same legal protections under the ADA. Schools have more discretion in these cases. Sarah stared at him. Are you telling me you want to remove my son's dog? I'm saying we need to evaluate whether the accommodation is appropriate given the educational environment. We have to balance Michael's needs against the needs of all students. Michael needs that dog, Sarah said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. She helps him focus, helps him communicate. His therapist has seen improvement. His teacher says he's more engaged. You want to take that away because some kids are distracted? Mrs. Bennett, I understand you're upset. You're damn right I'm upset. My son has fought for every single thing in his life. He's fought to speak, to move, to be included. And now that he finally has something that helps him, something that makes his life a little easier, you want to take it away. Mr. Vance folded his hands on his desk. No decision has been made yet, but we will need documentation from Michael's doctors stating that the dog is medically necessary, and we'll need to review our policies with our legal team. Sarah stood, her hands shaking. You'll have your documentation, and if you try to remove that dog, you'll have a lawsuit. She walked out before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. In the parking lot, she sat in her car and cried, tears of rage and fear and exhaustion. That evening, after Michael was in bed, she told Tom about the meeting. He listened quietly, his jaw tightening. They can't do this, he said finally. They're going to try. We need letters from every doctor, every therapist. We need to prove she's necessary. She is necessary. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with Michael can see that. It doesn't matter what's obvious. It matters what we can prove on paper. Tom stood and paced the small living room, his hands clenched into fists. I'm so tired of fighting. Every single thing with him is a fight. Insurance, school, equipment, everything. Can't something just be easy? Sarah understood his frustration because she felt it too. A bone-deep weariness that came from years of advocating, arguing, pushing for what Michael needed. But she also knew they didn't have the luxury of giving up. I'll call his doctors tomorrow, she said. We'll get the letters. Over the next week, Sarah collected documentation. Letters from Michael's pediatrician, his neurologist, his physical therapist, his speech therapist. Each one outlined how Keeper had improved Michael's quality of life, his emotional regulation, his motivation, his social engagement. She compiled it all into a folder and delivered it to Mr. Vance's office personally. This is everything you asked for, she said, setting the folder on his desk. Keeper is medically necessary for my son. If the school has concerns about other students, we're happy to work on accommodations. But the dog stays. Mr. Vance accepted the folder without looking at it. I'll review this with our team. We'll be in touch. Sarah left feeling like she'd won a battle, but not the war. That uncertainty hung over the house like a storm cloud, making everything feel fragile and temporary. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, the school sent a letter. Sarah opened it standing in the kitchen, her hands steady, despite the fear coursing through her. Tom stood beside her, reading over her shoulder. The letter stated that, after reviewing the documentation and consulting with legal counsel, the school would allow Keeper to continue accompanying Michael to school. However, there would be conditions. The dog must remain under control at all times, must not interfere with the educational process, and must be removed immediately if any incidents occurred. Additionally, Sarah and Tom would need to sign a liability waiver holding the school harmless for any dog-related issues. They're covering their asses, Tom said. I don't care, they said yes. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for weeks. We can keep her. That evening, she told Michael the good news. He was in his room, doing homework on his adaptive computer, with Keeper lying beside his desk. When Sarah explained that Keeper could stay at school, Michael's face split into the widest smile she'd seen in months. "She stays," he said. "She stays." Michael reached down, and Keeper lifted her head, pressing into his hand. "Good girl." Sarah crouched beside them, her hand on Michael's shoulder. "You know what this means. It means we have to keep doing everything right. Keeper has to be perfect. No mistakes." Michael nodded seriously. "We be good. I know you will." That night, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe they'd turned a corner. Maybe the hard part was behind them. She had no way of knowing what was coming. Thanksgiving came and went. They spent it at Rebecca's house in Portland, and Michael delighted in showing his cousins how Keeper could perform tricks and retrieve items on command. The dog tolerated the chaos of family with her usual calm focus, never straying more than a few feet from Michael's wheelchair. On the drive home, Michael fell asleep in the back seat, his head tilted against the window, one hand resting on Keeper's back. Sarah watched them in the rearview mirror, feeling a gratitude so intense it was almost painful. December arrived with cold rain and early darkness. The days fell into a rhythm that felt sustainable. School, therapy, homework, dinner, bedtime. Keeper was woven into every part of it, a constant, steady presence. Sarah stopped waiting for something to go wrong. That was her mistake. On a Wednesday afternoon in mid-December, Sarah was at home preparing dinner when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael's school. Her heart jumped immediately, but she told herself it was probably nothing. Maybe he'd forgotten something, or the bus was running late. Mrs. Bennett. It was Mrs. Crawford, Michael's teacher. Her voice was tight, strained. "There's been an incident. Michael is fine, but you need to come to the school right away." Sarah's mouth went dry. "What kind of incident?" "It's better if we discuss it in person. Can you come now?" Sarah grabbed her keys and was in the car within 2 minutes. The drive to the school felt like it took hours, though it was only 15 minutes. Her mind spun through possibilities, each worse than the last. When she arrived, Mrs. Crawford met her at the front office. The teacher was young, in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled into a practical bun. She usually had a warm, patient demeanor, but today she looked shaken. "What happened?" Sarah demanded. "Let's go to my classroom. Michael's there with the aide." They walked through the quiet hallway. Classes were still in session, and Sarah's anxiety ratcheted higher with every step. When they entered the classroom, she found Michael in his wheelchair near the windows, his face blotchy from crying. Keeper was beside him, pressed so close to the chair that there was no space between them. An aide Sarah didn't recognize stood nearby, looking uncomfortable. Sarah went directly to her son. "Michael, baby, what happened? Are you hurt?" Michael shook his head, but fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. His hands were tangled in Keeper's fur, gripping tight. The dog hadn't moved, hadn't looked away from his face. Mrs. Crawford closed the classroom door. There was an incident during recess. Some of the older kids, 5th graders, were on the playground at the same time as Michael's class. They started teasing Michael about his wheelchair. Sarah's hands curled into fists. Teasing him how? Mocking the way he moves, the way he talks. It escalated quickly. One of the boys pushed Michael's wheelchair, and Michael fell forward out of the chair. Sarah's vision tunneled. He fell. Is he hurt? He has some bruises on his hands and knees from catching himself, but he's not seriously injured. The aide got to him quickly. And where was Keeper during this? Mrs. Crawford's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. That's what we need to discuss. When Michael fell, Keeper, she reacted. She got between Michael and the boys. She didn't bite anyone, but she was aggressive, barking, teeth showing. She scared the children.